If you haven't heard of American Psycho the Musical, but you've seen the movie or read the book, you're probably thinking, wait, what? A musical of that? What does he sing about killing people while scantily clad women dance behind him? And yes, that is exactly what happens. So the first actual production was in London, which is, the last time I checked, not in America. Excuse me, this isn't British Psycho. I will be talking about the London cast recording quite a lot throughout this because I think everything it did right really showcases everything the Broadway production got wrong. So one of the first things we hear in the opening song is a little soundbite from second worst American president ever, Ronald Reagan, whose influence on American society at the time more or less created Patrick Bateman. Patrick Bateman can only exist as he does in a deeply fucked up society, in a deeply fucked up moment in its history, and who better encapsulates that spirit than the man who would lead the nation to feast on its own tail like a red, white, and blue Ouroboros. Now for me, nothing will top the way Matt Smith does the opening monologue. The way of speaking he just generally has throughout. Maybe it's because I'm used to the Christian Bale Bateman and it's the closest to that, but I really do think it's the truest interpretation of the character. He sounds like he's dead inside, a husk of a human being, bragging about how ripped he is and how fine his clothes are to exactly no one. And I think Benjamin Walker is just maybe too charismatic. Benjamin Walker feels like he should be playing Curly in Oklahoma, a rough, rugged man's man with charm to spare, not an inhuman killing machine. He actually gives Patrick too much personality when he should basically have none. So, sorry Ben, you're still ripped as hell though, and you could beat me up easily, which I would gladly let you do. A few songs could easily be cut to the benefit of the show. Selling Out is one of them, and here's why. One, musically it doesn't quite fit in. The guitar strumming out chords, even though they're sparse, and the majority of the backing is synth pop, which does fit. The guitar sticks out and doesn't really come in again in a big way, and it kind of misleads the audience into what musically they will be hearing. Two, nothing happens. There's no inciting event. We don't even learn that much about him. The lyrics are lacking in subtext and, quite frankly, text. We do get to see him interacting with people as an extension of his daily routine, but none of these interactions really come up again. He mentions returning videotapes later, which isn't given any greater meaning by this vignette. The laundromat thing does explain how he's able to get away with obvious bloodstains, but you don't really need to logic proof that aspect because none of this even actually happens, probably. Oh, spoiler, by the way, none of this even actually happens, probably. And three, when I first listened to the soundtrack, I just listened to the London version, which skips right from the morning routine to cards, and I think that's a much better option. It gives you just enough setup to kind of get what his deal is, but leaves some mystery, and then thrusts you into the actual story, which is something musicals need to learn how to do. You can actually just have the story happen. You don't need to dwell on exposition or internal monologues to make the audience feel at home. You can actually just start the show. And I know is an antithetical to what a musical is to leave out all the monologuing, but also, no, it's not. It's fine. The ensemble is killing it, but why do they all look like extras from The Matrix? Also, I'm hearing sopranos singing piercing high notes above everything. This is not a choir concert, excuse me. You don't give people high notes like that when you know they're gonna be dancing their butts off. That's not fair to them. I don't usually call out actors when I'm doing these because the performance of the show and what the show is written as are two different things, and I'm mostly concerned with critiquing the written end because that's where the meat is, that's the thing that stays, the thing that makes the show fundamentally what it is. However, certain people in this totally legit recording I'm watching need to sing on pitch 100% of the time. That's my hot take for this week. If you're on Broadway, you should be able to sing on pitch literally always. Literally every second you're singing, you should be singing the right notes. especially when the score you're singing isn't particularly difficult. Also, I think the lyric changes they made from London to Broadway should not have happened, both in this song, but generally, maybe every single one of them. I appreciate the decision to have Patrick shirtless as a metaphor. It's foreshadowing that if he can get away with not wearing a shirt in public and nobody notices, he can get away with being almost naked and clearly covered in blood. And I'm sure that was a conscious decision by the creative team, but what was also probably a conscious decision was, hey, we've got these killer pecs. Can't let them go to waste under clothes. And so, they make as many members of the cast get as naked as possible, which is also the only reason the song Hard Bodies exists. I think Cards and You Are What You Wear really complement each other well. They're kind of sister songs, one for showing how vapid and bougie the men are, and one to show how vapid and bougie the women are, except Cards is actually relevant to the plot because it's when the inciting incident happens. Yes, I know literal plot happens in You Are What You Wear, but it's not a part of the song. It's an interruption, and it doesn't count. So they cut Sri Lanka from the Broadway version, and that is a crime. That is a straight-up federal crime. They should be arrested and sent to prison. Not only did they cut it, they just made the actors speak the lines as straight dialogue, which is an actual felony. Lyrics are lyrics. Dialogue is dialogue. They're different ways of communicating that usually don't lend themselves to being converted to the other. Sometimes it works, sometimes, in this case, it absolutely does not. I'm steamed. I'm a little heated. Sri Lanka is actually a good song, and actually important. It shows that Patrick can perform political awareness, probably on the same level everyone else in the show does, which is clearly him spouting off things he's read in the paper. There's no cohesive ideology behind what he's saying. He's just spouting off sound bites about topics he's heard are important: terrorism, apartheid, the arms race, world hunger, all of which he appears to care about, but of course, as we know, he doesn't. Which is almost too on the nose, but manages to be one of the best single moments of social commentary the show offers up. The Patrick Batemans of the world will spout off a bit of vague, pseudo-intellectual catchphrases, and because of their high status within the capitalist class, they're allowed to just leave it at that. Although, notice how he slips in that line near the end.
Let's take some access to federal taxes. Let's throw away our inhibitions.
This is brilliant because we see Patrick framing perhaps the only thing he actually cares about, his own wealth and well-being, as some sort of liberatory crusade, as if giving himself and his buddies tax cuts for the insane amount of wealth they accrue doing nothing is a noble venture tied to self-actualization somehow, and not simply a way of making his own life easier at the expense of literally everyone else. What a good subtle moment. And they cut it and mashed it into some rushed monologues, you absolute bastards. It's like they ripped everything of actual consequence out and replaced it with Broadway bullshit, which is the new name of my channel. Anyway, speaking of songs they cut and replaced with worse songs, Killing Time, or should I say, Killing Time 2.0. A cocaine-fueled existential crisis in the midst of a late capitalist hellscape is replaced by a mindless club beat which accomplishes nothing. God, why did you do these things? Why? You had a great show on your hands, and then you made the exact wrong decision on nearly every front. Speaking of wrong decisions, and what I'm not sure are the what shall we call jukebox songs, I'm torn about these. For one thing, I saw a review that said that non-original songs were the highlight of this show, and no, they're not. You're wrong about everything you've said in your entire life. Because the thing is, Tongue-in-Cheek is actually very good at writing music. They're definitely cool arrangements. It's really sweet how the vocal lines intertwine and intersect as a music nerd, and I think they work better as features on an album rather than in a show, because obviously, when you write original lyrics and music, you imbue them with character and meaning specific to that dramatic moment, to that character, to that interaction. Jukebox songs have none of that. And besides doing a cool thing with them, I don't see why they were absolutely necessary. However, if I were to have to defend them, I would say they did a good job in context of providing a certain feel to scenes, especially when they're sort of background music. It's like scoring in a movie. It does determine the tone of a scene, but personally, I think Duncan could have written better songs that would have contributed more than just a feeling. Well, way to ruin teddy bears for me and everyone ever.
Don't you call him a homo!
Why did they change this line to a homo? It has so much more punch as faggot. It sounds weird that she gets so upset about what is the playground version of an actual homophobic slur, and they're not afraid to say fag because Patrick says he had to kill a fag and his fag dog later, so what's the deal? Dude, this makes me so mad, because American Psycho is actually ripe for comedy if you take just the source material, but they instead decided to go with the tired old, like, it's been done so many times before, joke of, now it's one day more. Isn't that great? American Psycho is actually funny. Stop doing this, please. Stop it. This is a bit of a problem with all forms of the story, all the way back to the book, but the female characters just have nothing going on whatsoever, except their obsession with Patrick, and sometimes, I guess, shopping. I mean, every one of these people, except maybe Jean, is entirely full of shit, but at least Tim Price gets to have an existential crisis. Oh wait, right, not anymore he doesn't, because Broadway. I mean, look at Evelyn and Jean. They both have a decent amount to do. They have a decent amount of stage time and get to sing a decent amount, but they just have no discernible character traits. And you can do vapid characters that have some sort of personality, or at least comment on them in some way through their actions. And I don't know, hey, maybe that's also a comment on how every one of these rich cockroaches are also Patrick Bateman, but at least Jean should have something going on. They went through the trouble of making her a bigger character, but all of her time is dedicated to being obsessed with Patrick. Mistletoe alert, aka continuing the long tradition of musicals having a Christmas song even if they're in no way related to Christmas. Have you noticed this? Have you noticed how many musicals, even if they're not about the holidays, have at least one Christmas song? This, Rent, She Loves Me, Songs for a New World, Promises, Mame, Meet Me in St. Louis, Catch Me If You Can, Billy Elliot, Tommy, on and on. I don't know why this is a thing. So let's recap. They've cut out songs that actually contained some commentary and left in nice thought, which further enforces the fact that every character is obsessed with Patrick, and this song's purpose is, I guess, to make us feel sympathy with him because it's Broadway, and dear God, we can't have a main character we're not supposed to root for. We have to go into his backstory and reveal that maybe deep down he's actually a really nice guy and not just a serial killer. This is what I call the JD syndrome. Look, maybe I'm being harsh, but this show has the potential to be great with the solid source material and the banging score. It should be, it just wasn't pulled off correctly. Now, to say something positive, I Am Back is absolutely chilling. It's peak f***ed up. The choreography and the staging here is so gnarly. It's so visceral. Oh my god. Not to mention Benjamin Walker gets to show off for a second. Hey guys, just so you know, I can belt. A girl before. Okay, first of all, a girl before what? A girl before what exactly? That is not expounded upon. Petition, change.org, petition to get the writers to tell us what she is a girl before. No, but actually, this song is really pretty, but again, Jean gets a whole song entirely dedicated to having feelings for Patrick, which does not go anywhere. Don't You Want Me could be cut. It's not even worth listing reasons why. It just has no purpose. It's like they got the rights to one more song than they ended up needing, but they were still like, well, we paid for it.
Maybe this schism is just a symptom of late capitalism.
Actually, yes, this schism is just a symptom of late capitalism, which is why everyone is wrong about American Psycho. A lot of the critical talk around American Psycho, or with any media that deals with life under late capitalism, a lot of it is misdirected at consumerism and materialism, which is an empty, shallow, pseudo-intellectual stance to take. If you want to sound smart without doing any of the work of critical thinking, decry at every available opportunity how people like to buy things, how it's evil to want to have a nice, comfortable life and pretend like you don't also want that on some level. That kind of observation just does nothing to dig even a little bit beneath the surface of what's really going on. Instead of taking shots at individual actions, we should be critiquing the economic system that fetishizes commodities and turns people into objects, aka exactly what Patrick Bateman does. It's not our problem that Patrick and his friends argue over meaningless bullshit and spend obscene amounts of money on nothing. It is our problem, however, that they have the means to, that the ability of the upper class to go on weeks-long spontaneous vacations to the Hamptons comes at the expense of the worker who cannot afford to take a single sick day. We should be angry with Patrick and all of his disgusting friends, not for being obsessed with what kind of shoes you can or can't wear with a suit, but because of the massive amount of wealth they acquire through being actual human vampires sucking money instead of blood. Maybe the most disgusting thing about Patrick Bateman's life is not that he's a deranged serial killer, but that he's allowed to be, and he's allowed to operate at the top levels of society with absolutely no repercussions. But then, just when the show was about to prove a point, and perhaps even prove it convincingly, there's this line.
Look at what's been done here.
Leaving the audience to think for themselves is fine. But you've clearly been building to a point for 2 hours now, and I think you absolutely need to state it, because in my experience, if you let your audience determine what to make of something, they will come away from it either with the same ideas, taking what you've said and mangling it so it fits inside their worldview, or, more common, they just go on about their evenings, perhaps wondering what Benjamin Walker's exercise routine is. So the rich people who can afford tickets to go see this show on Broadway will come away from it thinking, well, I'm certainly not like them. I'm not that materialistic. I'm a good person. I don't kill people. But if you state what your intentions are instead of leaving them vague, if you confront the audience with a clearly stated, nuanced idea, they will be forced to think, at least just a little. And you were so close, American Psycho. You were so close. If you just let this story be about a guy who kills people, and you kind of did, then that is all the audience will come away from it thinking. Nothing. They'll come out of the theater commenting, maybe, on the performances and the production design, but will inevitably stray back into debating where to go to dinner now. Probably Dorsia.